Welcome to Paranormal M, where we bring you first-hand accounts of paranormal activity. Drop a comment, hit that notification bell. I hope you're as excited about the unknown as we are. My father predicted his death. I hope you don't find me insensitive, because I believe I just had a paranormal experience. About a year ago, my father mentioned a vision that he had. He said he could see himself lying in the morgue, and he somehow knew that the vision would come true within a year or so. At the time, I didn't put too much thought into it, because my dad often had vision nightmares, and sometimes he had trouble differentiating reality from imagination. Anyway, during the past few weeks, his health deteriorated very quickly. It was obvious that he wouldn't live, maybe another few years. Then one day he came out of the bathroom, white as a ghost, and he said, "My face in the mirror is the same face I saw in my vision. Exactly the same features, even the hair length." My sister joked that maybe he cut his hair and cheat death, but an ominous feeling resided in the room nonetheless. He was dead serious. Anyway, last night was the worst I've ever seen him. Seriously, he went from being quote-unquote normal in the morning to being inches away from death at night. He couldn't sit up, he couldn't speak, and his legs were all swollen. He died in his sleep, and an ambulance took him away in the morning. Today's been a roller coaster of emotions, but ultimately, I'm glad that he's finally at peace. It really feels like he lived just long enough to see me and my sister grow up. And in another year, he would have been alone with my mother in an empty house. Something I know he couldn't live with. He's very family-oriented. I'll never know whether his vision was real or coincidence, but it really makes me wonder about the mysteries of life. There must be more to this world that we don't know about. May never know about until the next life. In any case, I'm sure my father's up there, pain-free and moving around without the use of a wheelchair. Paranormal occurrences in Appalachia. Located also on Native American territory. All of this occurred at my parents' home. This is the home that they currently live in. When I was 10, we moved to our small town to a property in the country. This property had documented having a late 1800s farmhouse that had been torn down quite a while ago. Never knew the date. It's a nice flat property that is one farm field away from the banks. That's the Ohio River, and the other side is woods, and an area at the top of the woods that has an Indian mound. The entire area was once Native American territory. One of my main hobbies growing up was walking along the water of the Ohio River and finding arrowheads with my family. We have a collection in a glass box at home. The first experience was my own, alongside my brother and sister. We had been living on the property for about 5 years at that point. No other occurrences before. It was summertime. My parents were at work. We had chores to do throughout the day, and it was midday that we all agreed to do the dishes together. My brother made sure to turn off the TV in the living room, beside the kitchen, so this way we wouldn't get distracted. We can get it done quicker. While we engaged in the dishes, my brother, super goofy, was singing random songs, and eventually said, "You know, Greensleeves is actually a really good song, and it has the same tune as What Child Is This?" Then we all just started singing what we knew of Greensleeves. We finished the chorus and all stopped singing, but immediately after we stopped, there was a whistle that continued the exact same melody of the chorus. It lasted for about 5 seconds before suddenly trailing off quietly. We had stared at each other, at least while it happened, and my brother is the only one of us who could whistle. He and my sister immediately went to check by the passerby outside, but saw nothing. We have no close neighbors, and if someone were walking by, they'd still be fully visible. I was having a panic attack from fear. We all did a thorough check inside the house, but found nothing. Is a spirit or a ghost trying to latch onto me? Some background. I'm 14 years and struggling with my mental health. I live in a 100-year-old two-story home. I live upstairs by myself. My parents and younger brother are downstairs. I've always seen shadow figures, but after I moved in around 2 years ago, it increased there. The past month or so, my mental health got worse, and I've been off and on, a few different medications too, and at one point I was only taking a low dose of the meds that I'd taken for over a year. During this time, the shadow figures and random noises had gotten worse to the point where I started sleeping downstairs on the couch. I eventually moved back upstairs after starting 2 new meds, and I wasn't seeing or hearing any noises. As soon as I moved back upstairs, however, I had a pit-like feeling in my stomach. I've been sleeping up there, but it feels like something is watching me. I don't think much of it until I started hearing the sounds again, like people talking at night. Everything just seemed to go down from there. Every time I was in my house, I had a sense of dread. One day when I was looking for my shirt, I was listening to music. I saw a flash of a hand reach out, place my shirt out from underneath there. I first thought it was my rabbit or something, but I don't know how he could get out that fast. Set it there. He's a rabbit. I ended up brushing it off and just saying that I was seeing stuff. The next day I was putting up my clothes and listening to music again. This is when I felt something grab at the bottom of my pants. I made sure my rabbit was up and my dog was too. I didn't have my dog and my rabbit. They were sleeping. Haven't found an explanation for the second encounter. With everything added up, I don't know what to think. I'd like to know some of your all's opinions. Do I have a strong intuition, or am I psychic? This all started when I was young. I woke up one morning on a school day, instantly knew that something bad happened. My parents hadn't woke me up for school. I went into the kitchen. My mother told me what happened to my grandma. She was found dead inside her home. I was too young to understand what happened to her, but I knew it wasn't a good one. I visited Colorado. I did this with my childhood best friend when we were in elementary school. This was back in 2008. We visited the famous Stanley Hotel. This was the hotel that was the inspiration for The Shining. While touring the hotel, I entered a room on one of the upper levels. The door windows blew open and the door slammed shut. An adult male that was with me ran out screaming. This same childhood friend lived in an old house. It was once a one-room schoolhouse. We were watching the premiere of High School Musical in the living room and then fell asleep on the floor. I woke up to a green glow in the distance. I looked and there was a small child at the top of the stairs. So scared I shut my eyes, but every time I opened them, he was closer. I ended up yelling my friend's name, waking her up when she was standing over. But when she woke up, he was gone. A few weeks later, I told her parents what I saw. Her parents told me that they also experienced something very similar after I told them my story. I also used to see shadows in the attic and the basement. I found out recently that 3 people were murdered and buried on the property. That house burned down in the middle of the night. There was also an elderly male that visited the house and talked about how his son and him lived at the house. His son passed away. Not at the house, but his son was deceased. I have many other odd paranormal stories, but that's for another time. I've always been able to sense energy, though. Not just in a paranormal aspect, but humans too. I can sense a person's presence before I can hear or see them. I sometimes hear ringing in my ears, and maybe a heaviness over my head when it's a certain energy. The most recent thing that happened to me was last week. I told one of my coworkers that I was feeling very anxious and had a bad feeling. The next day, one of our coworkers was brutally murdered. I'm not claiming to be able to speak or see the dead, but I'm very confused on the way my senses work. I'm hoping there's anyone else out there who's had this happen to them as much as it has to me. I don't talk to my friends about it. I don't want to scare people or have them think I'm weird or faking it. Please help me by giving suggestions, because at this point, I'm feeling crazy. My ongoing and terrifying experience after leaving haunted Goatman's Bridge in Denton, Texas. Hi. For reference, I'm a 24-year-old female. Okay, I'm going to start out by apologizing for not adding any photos or tangible proof or deep history lessons here. I'd appreciate it if you all couldn't accuse me of lying and being mentally ill, because this is 100% true. You must take me at my word, because this is still an ongoing experience in me, and I'm physically affected every day by ongoing nausea, especially when I look at the photos or talk about the history of this haunted place. I'm trying my best to avoid making matters worse. I feel a grueling resistance as I'm typing this. I'm fighting the nausea right at this moment, so I hope you can understand. Last Sunday was Father's Day. I was with my boyfriend, my mom, and my dad, sitting at the dinner table eating, when the topic of ghost hunting came up. My boyfriend, which we're going to call B, which the narrator is going to just call Barry, because he hates saying letters. I love this type of thing. Neither of us are particularly religious. We're a couple of open-minded, curious agnostics, so the idea that spirits could exist and possibly show themselves to us excites us very much. We had heard about this Goatman's Bridge from a couple sources: friends, Ghost Adventures TV shows, and other articles online. We also live relatively close to the location. please look up the history yourself. Just Google Goatman's Bridge, Denton history. I will tell you, it is KKK-related gruesome violence, leading to the death of a successful African American that lived nearby. Every time I read about it now, I feel like I'm gonna puke. So anyways, we decided to go. My dad's never encountered a spirit before, and this place seemed to be a very popular spot for ghost hunting. We went at about 10 p.m., a prime time to explore the bridge and hike the trails with little interruption. The bridge at first was empty, seemed a bit spooky. We didn't see anything out of the ordinary there. We then hiked a couple of different trails nearby. The first one was completely fine, no activity. The second trail, we saw a pair of glowing eyes in the distance. When I shone my flashlight in that direction, we saw them. We all think it was a deer, though. Third trail. We come up to this very scary-looking graffiti-covered structure. It had words like, "We all die," and it had 2 pentagrams with letters and things like that. There were stars across the top of it with fake blood dripping from every one. It also had a number of symbols and words that none of us or Google Lens could decipher. Although, we all did see my nickname, Jen, written, slightly hidden with another acronym. Forgot what it was, but I'm not going to look at the picture right now, sorry. Later, B had dug some more online, found out that the structure is actually an altar that had been used for animal sacrifices. It's still being used in rituals by a modern group called the Dark KKK. All in all, the most exciting part about this is to place itself with me tripping over a root and bruising my knee. Yeah, so kind of boring. The only paranormal activity that the 3 of us had witnessed was my dad expressing that he felt an unexplainable quick tap on his back a few yards from the altar. So now we go back to the bridge, and to our surprise, about 4 or 5 men, white in their early 20s, they were sitting on the spider-infested bridge smoking cigarettes and remaining unusually silent. I honestly don't know why anybody would hang out there at midnight, not have flashlights or anything. But hey, maybe they're just kind of weird. Who knows? I didn't have a very good feeling about them, though. As soon as I got in the car, I felt like I was going to puke. I wasn't sick from any illness. I'm not sick now either. At first, I believed it was, and is, a visceral reaction to the haunted place. Now, I know what it was, and it's something more. So when we got home, I was in immense pain, unspeakable, excruciating nausea. I went to go wash my hands in the bathroom. When I look at my reflection, I didn't recognize myself. I was looking into someone else's eyes. I met the gaze of someone violent, someone with immense hate. It was not my reflection, rather someone or something that was using my body to see through me. I know it sounds crazy, but it gets crazier. I apologize on some of these upcoming details. I was not in control of my body or mind at this time. My memory of this part is almost dreamlike. Barry could see that something had changed in me. He told me to lie down because the nausea was making me lightheaded and very dizzy. I remember Barry asking me a series of questions. I don't remember most, but I do remember saying that I'm not Jen. I remember how my hate-filled gaze felt resting on Barry's eyes. I remember my dog not coming over to me like she usually does. I remember telling Barry that I was unsure of whether he should stay or not, because I was afraid I would hurt him. Physically. I felt extremely violent, to to the point that I was digging my nails into my hands as hard as I could. But I couldn't feel any pain. I remember wanting to break his hand when I was holding it. I remember fixating on a wall filled with very old photos of my ancestors and having a feeling that whatever's in me is trying to learn how to become me. I still think that last feeling I mentioned is lingering in me, even today. The next day I woke up, couldn't shake the thought that I had this new body. I tried doing things I don't normally do. I was testing my pleasures, my body, its limits. I think whatever took my body is mostly gone. It's a possibility that I may in fact be haunting my own psyche. But both Barry and I know that something took hold of me that night, and I'm paying for that every day now. By the way, I took pictures with my DSLR, some with flash, some without. In almost every photo, if you zoomed all the way in, you could see at least one red, strange-looking pixel lurking in different parts of the photo. I have absolutely no clue if this is a camera-related issue or not, but I become more physically ill the longer I look at them. Does anybody know if this is normal for taking raw night photos on a Canon Rebel T3i? The red dot showed up in both images with flash and without flash, so that means it was totally dark. So as you know, Barry did some more digging on Google after this whole thing. He actually found out that women typically had a stronger paranormal experience or reactions at Goatman's Bridge, and could be related to this evil spirit named Steve. I don't wish to say any more about that, so please feel free to look it up. Scientific proof of the afterlife. The law of conservation states energy cannot be created nor destroyed. I submit to you that the presence of an electrical current within the body also has to follow the law of conservation, in that it cannot be created or destroyed. It, in fact, has been present since the beginning of time, or even the past, that, and will always be present, never ending. We have enough understanding about the energy to know there is a positive, a negative, and a neutral. Consider for a moment this energy exists in and out of our dimension. We will call it dimensional-wide energy. In this theory, this energy exists and affects us, but not on a level that can harm or be seen and barely measurable. But if you could see it outside of its normal environment, the form, color, size, and measurement would vary depending on the development, which is a result of knowledge gained in our dimension, and the type and size of the power output, more positive than negative output, as an example. This is the actual spirit each of us has, evident by the visual aura that we put out. Think of our bodies as a battery, storing energy constantly until our demise, when there's a release of that energy. That energy is then passed on to another, or even multiple bodies. Also, think of our bodies as a kind of antenna, receiving and transmitting energy back and forth throughout our lives, but always maintaining the same level, never dropping below the highest level produced in each other. To do so is to start the process of our bodies breaking down and passing away. In storing of the energy within ourselves, we have the ability to store the three types separate from each other. Those levels can fluctuate up and down considerably, which means you can at any given time have more stored up negative, positive, or neutral dimensional wide energy at any given time. And the one stored up the most directly affects our personalities at that time. For example, if you have more positive energy stored up in your body, this energy creates positive thinking or makes you do good things. Also, we transmit the positive energy to others around us. We can even submit emotions or a basis to prove the types of energies that we've stored up the most. The negative being anger, sadness, and despair. Positive being happy, love, and peacefulness. Neutral being calm, or the absence of any emotion. That, in this theory, is the essence of the energy stored. The energy directly relates to our emotions, in which transmits to others the energy we have stored. Death comes to all of us, but this energy has to abide by the law of conservation. So, what happens to it? Electricity is built in desire to reach the ground. Consider the law of gravity. Even though there's no measurable mass or weight to electricity, doesn't mean it doesn't have one. I submit that in fact, it does. By applying the law of gravity, we must assume when this energy leaves our body, it goes to the ground. Consider the Earth as one big recycling machine. We see this over and over, where the Earth uses anything that has died to produce new life. I propose the same can be said of the dimensional-wide energy. The Earth takes this energy and uses it to create new life. So where does this afterlife fit in all of this? Eventually, all life on Earth will end. This energy will still be present, though. This is where the dimensional-wide part of the theory comes in. Consider for a moment 3 separate dimensions, all existing within each other. The dimension of positive energy, the dimension of negative energy, and the dimension of neutral energy. We live in the neutral dimension, therefore all life starts with a neutral energy. It exists as neither a good or a bad life. We choose which energy that we want to absorb the most, and when we pass these energies separate into its respective dimension, heaven being the realm of positive energy and hell being the realm of negative energy. The reason these dimensions exist is because one cannot exist without the other. Just like in electronic devices, you need a positive and a negative output for it to work, with the neutral being the energy that transfers back and forth through it. In a way, we can say that when we die, we go to heaven and hell and stay right here. You may even be able to explain things paranormal with this theory. Ghost. Seeing the future, recalling a past life. These may all be a direct example of this antenna that we have, and being able to tap a specific wavelength of a specific energy to be able to do these things. Even the visual manifestation of a ghost could be a sort of a short circuit of the wiring, you could say. Whether all of this is true or not, it makes for a compelling story and something to debate. No matter what religious beliefs you may hold, there is one inviolable truth. Inviolable. We must all acknowledge it. There's a presence of an electrical current within our bodies, and that energy has to come and go somewhere. Whatever the truth may be, that much is certain. The real story behind Roswell. I don't know if this story fits here, but it's a story I've known all my life, and until now, I've never spoken about it. My grandfather not only knew it really crashed in Roswell on June 24th, 1947, but he had been chasing it for almost 5 years before it crashed. The craft wasn't a UFO, nor was it a weather balloon. It was something much more dangerous. It was a device constructed by the Nazis during World War II under the name Die Glocke. During 1942, my grandfather was stationed in London and was in the intelligence unit involved in collecting information on what the Nazis were doing. The American government at the time was very interested in gaining this intelligence for themselves, due to the implications most of it had on advancing weapons. Because of this work, many of the scientists defected to the United States, and programs were started with them that gave us things like nuclear technology and missile technology, rocket technology. During this period in the war, there was talk amongst these scientists about claims of technology that was like nothing else produced. Nothing else produced by any war machine in the history of the world. It was considered otherworldly and deemed Wunderwaffe technology. One device named the Bell was a culmination of different technologies put together to produce a device that could move at unrealistic speeds without any forces placed on the pilot inside. This couldn't be detected by any means at the time, including visual, and could travel through time. It had a power source that was radioactive and would be considered a miniature nuclear power plant that ran off plutonium, cesium, cerium, and thorium. If captured by enemy forces, the pilot could set this power plant to overload, causing a massive meltdown that in turn would cause an explosion that was more powerful than the Tsar Bomba developed by the USSR. It used this power source to manipulate the electromagnetic, gravitational, and photonic fields to form a quote-unquote bubble. This bubble surrounded the Bell. Manipulating the bubble would allow the Bell to move directionally and through time. It could travel to the past or future and return to the present, which was found out by accident during testing. It could also become completely invisible. During World War II, any technology found by these experiments the Nazis were doing was taken to a secret location, studied by our scientists, and the ones that defected here from Germany. Troops on the ground found remnants of where testing and construction of the Bell were, but it was always cleaned of the technology they were using long before the troops would arrive. The Bell was never recovered during World War II. Only hints of its existence were ever recovered along with traces of radiation. One of the tests ran by the Nazis later on was discovered to be the results of the exposure to the radiation the Bell gave off, and was done on the prisoners of the Gross Rosen concentration camp. Here, troops found prisoners that had severe radiation poisoning, and most died from the illness. For several years, my grandfather chased the Bell all over, from reports of sightings that extended all over the world. Then, in 1947, due to the pilot becoming sick from radiation exposure, it crashed in Roswell, New Mexico. When the soldiers moved into the area, they found the Bell still active, but malfunctioning due to the crash. And the pilot that was ejected by the crash. He lived for 8 hours after the crash before passing from injuries and severe radiation sickness. The craft was moving to a location that was far enough away from civilization that, if it exploded, it wouldn't cause a nuclear fallout, and wouldn't harm any person except those involved in the location. The pilot was reported to be confused as to where he was. He seemed to believe it was 1944 and he was in Germany. From the vague accounts the intelligence agency was able to collect from the pilot before death, he explained that they received orders to move the Bell because they knew soldiers from the Allied forces would be capturing the base in the next few weeks. The Bell wasn't just moved to another location, but it was moved to a different time to test the capabilities of time travel. The pilot was ordered to move the craft 2 days into the future and to secure a location farther from the front lines. But when he did, the area had been bombed, and because it materialized in the debris, the craft became unstable and uncontrollable. Then it performed what the pilot called a bounce, propelling it into the future where he crashed in New Mexico 3 years later. No other information was obtained from the pilot after that initial interview. His speech became harder to understand, garbled and gibberish. Muffled gargling was all he could produce before passing away. It was apparent that the Bell was still malfunctioning more and more, with reports that it would phase in and out, move in the bunker it was being held at. It would move so fast it seemed to be in multiple places at once. Then it simply and slowly started fading out of existence. It was held in the facility for a total of 29 days. Nothing was ever learned about the device. Because it was so unstable, nobody could get close to it. The only time anybody was able to physically touch it was the time shortly after the crash when it seemed most of the systems were not functioning. My grandfather said there's only one piece of the craft in existence that he knows of. A piece that was about 1 foot in length and about 6 inches wide, made of gold alloy over steel that was melded together by a massive amount of radiation it was exposed to. He said that when they used a piece of equipment to pick it up, it vibrated so much the equipment would drop it. Yet, when held in your hand, it was calm. Although we didn't learn anything about the Bell, except bits and pieces that we were able to get from intelligence reports, the Bell sparked many experiments by the government in stealth, nuclear, and even time travel technologies. The extent they've taken this research and development to my grandfather's knowledge wasn't known. But he said the possibilities of what they could accomplish with it was endless, and, in the wrong hands, would be dangerous to the world. He believed up to his death that a lot of the sightings of UFOs were in fact the Bell rematerializing in different locations. Or maybe a recreation of the Bell the United States was able to create from research. He told me how much the intelligence they gathered and the research that followed has given this world so much technology it was hard to keep up with. He died before we had cell phones, internet, or a lot of the technology that we have today. I often wonder how much we gained from the Bell, and how much we don't know that we gained yet. I'm sure we have gained much more than I can imagine, and then some. One thing is for sure, whether you believe my grandfather or not, we made such an advancement in technology after World War II, it can't be explained. And the mysteries of some of the research done during that time by all nations still spark interest. If only it was in the hands of the right people. Ask Reddit. When I was 18, I was scrolling through Tumblr on my phone at 2 a.m., giggling to myself, since I shared a room with my brother. Then I hear a male voice down the aisle. It sounded like it was going toward the kitchen. It sounded like grumbling, like an angry kind of grumble. So I instantly assumed it was my grouch of a dad. I felt a strange pressure on my chest. Then the sounds get louder and louder. Then Then suddenly the door to my parents' bedroom opens. And since it's an old door, it's pretty much falling apart. It makes a popping sound when it opens. The sounds stop. Then I hear my dad go, "Who's there?" He opened my door and I pretended to be asleep so he didn't give me shit for being awake so late. He closed the door, went back to sleep. Next morning, my mom asked me to put away the cereal if I got hungry and ate at night. When he asked me why, she told me that my dad was angry because he found cereal on the floor, and what looked like crushed cereal, like someone stepped on it and just walked away. I got the chills down my spine, told her what I heard at night. That ends abruptly. The following words are she and the. So I'm going to just end it with, I got chills down my spine and told her what I heard at night. Random puddle of water appeared on my desk. Something really strange happened 2 days ago. I woke up that morning just to find random water spilled on a desk I only used to store stuff on. My first reaction was that a leak had happened, but after checking the ceiling, it was clear no leak had indeed happened. I must add that for some strange reason the water touched the edge of the desk but didn't fall onto the floor. The puddle was about the size of a large glass of water. I know for a fact that I didn't drop that water. I don't even use that desk. One last thing that makes it creepier is that the night before I ran out of power and spent multiple hours with candles lit up. Did I invite some sort of entity? What kind of glitch in the Matrix happened here? To be clear, I live in this apartment for a little over a year. Never had any clear evidence that my place might be haunted, aside from minor things, who often I found an explanation for. My landlord, which is my grandpa, had no respect to my privacy and often comes into my apartment when I'm at work and opens doors, windows, and moves stuff around. Up to today, I always blamed him for these things. But what if he wasn't all to blame? The ghost in my house, and the first time I ever felt true fear. Still traumatized. So this is an experience from when I was 7. When I was little, whenever my dad went out of town for a business trip, I'd sleep in my parents' bed with my mom. This was one of those nights. Sometime in the middle of the night, my mom woke me up saying that she heard someone was in the house. Note, it was just us two and my dog. I listened and I could hear a door slamming shut, opening and slamming shut again. The weird part was it sounded like it was the same door over and over again. My mom called 911. This is when I silently cried in fear under the covers. I'd never felt such fear, and it was the first time in my life that I'd been completely overwhelmed with panic. I also heard my dog going crazy out in the hallway. She was whimpering, and I could hear her collar jingle as she was running. I couldn't tell if she was running from something or chasing something. When the police arrived, the noises stopped. They searched the house, but found nothing. As soon as they left, me and my mom tried to go to sleep, but the door opening and closing started up again. My mom said she didn't want to call the police again, so I cried myself to sleep that night. When I woke up in the morning, it had stopped. There was nothing out of place, no open doors or open windows. My mom doesn't like to talk about that night. For years after that day, I'd check closets and under the bed and everywhere somebody might be hiding. Whenever I walk into a room, especially. To this day, I can't sleep somewhere if a door isn't locked. I'm 18 now, and I can never forget that night. I've always been angry at my mom for waking me up to experience the whole thing. Could have slept through it, completely avoided the trauma. I also can't help but wonder what would have happened if I'd slept in my own room that night. I grew up in a haunted house. My new apartment is even more haunted. I grew up in a home for 21 years. It was pretty haunted. Many unexplainable phenomena, such as footsteps from something other than a living, phantom smells, objects being thrown, items disappearing completely. They were never found, even after gutting the place before moving. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal since I was a little girl. I even truly believe I've had evil entities enter my dreams. I had a truly evil and disturbingly gory one when I was only 7 years old. This is before I was even allowed to be influenced with such things like violent movies and TV. Well, a couple of years ago, I moved to a basement apartment complex. If you follow paranormal stuff, you'll know basements are notorious for activity. Since I moved here, I've had poltergeist activity. I've seen with my own eyes one, and I've been woken up to an unknown female voice saying, "Hey," directly in my ear. It was so clear it sounded like it was a living person. It even caused a breeze on my face from the breath behind the voice. I've also seen orbs with both my eyes and with my phone camera. My cat's seen at the same time as well these things. My bedroom door has been knocked on more than one occasion. Woke me up from the sleep. I had another dream recently after moving here, and I believe it was paranormal. It was not myself in the dream. I was not even the same ethnicity or age as myself, and it was beyond vivid. I experienced this person's death at the end of a handgun. I'm living in a very bad neighborhood at the moment, so that kind of death is not uncommon here. Only a week ago, I was physically, or what felt like, burned, and it left a mark that stayed for hours. I've also smelled not only unfamiliar perfume here, but also a rotten egg smell, which was not an odor encountered at my last place of residence. Sometimes I wake up with pretty bad bruises that were not there when I went to sleep. Last year I almost drowned, and since then, my sensitivity to the paranormal I've noticed is stronger than ever. Almost I feel like it's bordering on me being a medium. I should also add, while I live here, a person died on the property in the parking lot outside my unit. That's just one death that I know of, and that I don't know if there were others before I moved in. Honestly, though, I'm feeling the presence of several spirits. Every night it feels like dozens of eyes are on me. The point of this post is really kind of at the end of my rope. I can't sleep at night because being afraid of these spirits waking me up or entering my dreams and giving me nightmares or harming me while I'm sleeping. I'm new to Reddit, sort of. Maybe somebody can direct me to a sub for people that are paranormally sensitive or mediums, so I can connect with people who are the same. Also, any advice on how I can spiritually protect myself from the evil here? I've tried Christian prayer. It's not worked. My first and most recent experiences with entities. The first time I witnessed a ghost was in high school. This was back in 1878. Whoa, you must be old. 1878. That makes no sense. That means they'd be 100+ years old. I'm going to assume that they meant to write 1978. I was visiting a friend, walked into his house. Just off from the front door was the living room. I turned and I saw a woman by the window. She was dressed more like a woman from the 50s. This supports my thesis, okay. I thought this was odd. I smiled at her. She smiled back and faded from sight. My jaw must have dropped because my friend said, "You just saw her, didn't you?" That was the start of my paranormal journey. Since that time, I've seen and heard all manner of activity, from the mundane to the worst you could imagine. In my home, we have 3 spirits. One is a small girl, maybe 10. She wears a bright-colored dress and has blonde hair. We'll see her darting around the corners or letting out the occasional giggle. She likes to tap on things from one side of the house to the other. She is a busy one, but we don't see her every day. We also have a shadow person. I believe it's a woman. She shows up infrequently, but when she does, her favorite thing to do is stand in the middle of her hallway for about a minute or two, then just fades out. I ran into her about 2 years ago. I was headed back from having a cigarette. She was in the hall. We must have stared at each other for 30 or 40 seconds. I said, "It's your move." She faded out. The third one is also a shadow, but a 2-dimensional shadow. This shadow likes to walk past windows at night. We see it on the east side of the house. It walks very close to the window. My wife was the first one to see it. She was in her office. She called like she was scared to death. She said she saw a man. I took my dogs with me and there was nothing there, of course. But my dogs will bark like nuts if a bird farts 10 feet from our window. So they should have reacted to someone getting into her yard, but they didn't. My wife also said there was no noise. We have gravel on that side of the house, and no sound at all. My first and most recent experiences with entities. The first time I witnessed a ghost was in high school. This was back in 1878. Whoa, you must be old. 1878. That makes no sense. That means they'd be 100+ years old. I'm going to assume that they meant to write 1978. I was visiting a friend, walked into his house. Just off from the front door was the living room. I turned and I saw a woman by the window. She was dressed more like a woman from the 50s. This supports my thesis, okay. I thought this was odd. I smiled at her. She smiled back and faded from sight. My jaw must have dropped because my friend said, "You just saw her, didn't you?" That was the start of my paranormal journey. Since that time, I've seen and heard all manner of activity, from the mundane to the worst you could imagine. In my home, we have 3 spirits. One is a small girl, maybe 10. She wears a bright-colored dress and has blonde hair. We'll see her darting around the corners or letting out the occasional giggle. She likes to tap on things from one side of the house to the other. She is a busy one, but we don't see her every day. We also have a shadow person. I believe it's a woman. She shows up infrequently, but when she does, her favorite thing to do is stand in the middle of her hallway for about a minute or two, then just fades out. I ran into her about 2 years ago. I was headed back from having a cigarette. She was in the hall. We must have stared at each other for 30 or 40 seconds. I said, "It's your move." She faded out. The third one is also a shadow, but a two-dimensional shadow. This shadow likes to walk past windows at night. We see it on the east side of the house. It walks very close to the window. My wife was the first one to see it. She was in her office. She called like she was scared to death. She said she saw a man. I took my dogs with me and there was nothing there, of course. But my dogs will bark like nuts if a bird farts 10 feet from our window. So they should have reacted to someone getting into her yard, but they didn't. My wife also said there was no noise. We have gravel on that side of the house, and no sound at all. Radio conversations. I can hear in my office without a radio in my office. This is something interesting that's been happening to me. It started maybe 2 years ago. I was working in my home office when I heard what sounded like a conversation going on. It was like talk radio, like it carried on for about half an hour or so. Now my wife had gone to bed, and we live alone, so no kids to be talking to. I don't have a radio in my office. I wasn't listening to anything, and I was reading and doing some research. The conversation was rather muted. Couldn't hear what was being said. However, it sounded like two men talking. I do have a radio in the house, but I would be able to hear it clearly in my office. This has happened several times on and off. Sometimes I would hear a man and a woman talking, just loud enough to hear voices, but not loud enough to understand the conversation. I thought maybe my neighbor had a radio going, but their house is 20 feet from mine with a 7-foot block wall between us. I'm sure the sound couldn't travel that far. I live in Arizona, so it's very rare that we have our windows open, especially in the summer months. We don't want to give scorpions an easy way into the house. A few times I hold up my SB7 spirit box, and other than a few unintelligible voice-like sounds, couldn't hear anything that would be like what I was hearing. So the voice continues, now and again. I just find it very odd that it happens. And, just in case the topic comes up, I'm very mentally competent and have never heard a voice in my head, ever. Was my last house haunted? When I was 13 at the time, my family and I moved to just outside Columbus, Ohio in 2010 from the West Coast. We went to be near extended family. We lived at this house from 2010 to 2019. I was never a non-believer in the paranormal, but didn't think anything would ever happen to me or us. Every weird incident or experience I had there never struck me with much concern, at least in the moment. And I thought everything was just a weird coincidence. Also, these odd incidents that I'll explain here soon didn't happen too often, so there may be another reason why I didn't fixate on them as much. However, time passed, and recently had a discussion with my family about some weird incidents I had in the house. To my surprise, my parents and both my sisters were taken aback, and each said that they had weird occurrences as well. Here's a list of some of the things that I experienced along with my family. We had a grandfather clock. It had been in my dad's family for decades. According to him, it hasn't worked in almost 40 years. It was mainly in our house just for decoration. In 2011, I was on the computer in my room. Close by, the grandfather clock loudly chimed a song. I immediately ran into the living room with my dad and little sister with a what the fuck reaction. After about a minute or so, the song stopped, and the grandfather clock hadn't worked since until a few years later when my parents took it to a shop and got it completely fixed. If I had to pick a room that was deemed the most haunted, it would be the piano and dining room. We had 2 cats. We had these 2 curvy scratches on the wall. For a long time, we assumed it was the cats, but these markings were literally identical, which was odd. In the piano and dining room, there were more of these identical scratches on the wall, more than in any other room in the house. What creeped me out the most, well, that sometimes at night, my cats would stand on the floor and just stand at the ceiling corner of this room for 30 minutes to an hour, like something was there. They didn't do this in any other room in the house. My personal and most terrifying experience to this day was in the piano and dining room. It was the summer of 2018. Just my mom and I are at the house. It was 10:30 at night. I was locking the house up. There were 2 entryways to the piano room. I was a few feet away from the room, and I had just an eerie feeling about it when I started looking at it through the corner of my eye. Me trying to be bold made myself walk through the room just to confirm that it was clear. I walked in through one entryway and was exiting through the other. Literally, as soon as I was taking a step out of the room, a warm sensation hit my face. Immediately started having a bloody nose. Blood was coming out of both nostrils. I wasn't super spooked in the moment, but looking back now, along with my family now confessing to weird incidents in the house, amplified how scary this experience actually was. My dad said he probably had to replace over 100 light bulbs in that house, which apparently it's believed the paranormal interferes with electricity. My sister and my girlfriend at the time, and now my wife, and myself have all heard 3 knocks on our door at night at different times, and have all gotten up. No one was ever at the door. My older sister was once in the shower and heard my dad say, "Hey," in the bathroom. When she looked out, no one was in the house. She looked at the window and my dad was actually outside mowing the lawn. When she asked my dad, he said he'd been outside for almost an hour straight. Not really paranormal related, but I swear our house was some sort of wind tunnel. Every time it was windy, the entire house would make this loud howl. Super eerie. And just a side note, apparently this house was built in 2008 because the house before burned down. No one was killed in the fire to my knowledge. And like I said, there was really nothing clear-cut paranormal that happened in this house like movies. But I don't think all these experiences, well, you could deem them as normal. Occurrences like this happen so seldom, so I never really thought much about it at the time. But looking back now has me pretty spooked. What do you think? Malaysia. Unexpected visitor. This happened back when I was 12 years old in my hometown in Malaysia. It was school holidays. My parents had decided our family would be staying at our grandparents' house for a week. My grandparents' house is located 40 minutes away from the city. It's built in a small town in a rural suburb consisting of 3 other neighborhoods. The nearest town from their house is another 10-minute drive out in a dense tropical environment, which also means the entire suburb will be pitch black after sunsets between 5:30 and 6 p.m. The best thing about this time of the hour is the quiet and the peacefulness of the atmosphere, combined with faint cricketing noises in the background. You would hear these as you would lose yourself gazing at the starry skies surrounding the full moon. There's 4 rooms in my grandparents' house. The maid's room, the grandparents' room, the great-grandma's room, and my parents' room. My great-grandma was 97 at the time, so she moved to the city with my uncle, who had 3 maids to care of her. This means my younger brother Andy will be staying with me in great-grandma's room, since we don't want to share a room with her parents. Fair enough. Everything went well until our second last day. My parents attended a friend's wedding in the city, but therefore they won't be coming home due to heavy alcohol consumption from a celebration. It was already 9:30 p.m. My grandparents and the maids had already gone to bed. Only Andy and I were chilling in the living room. He was playing his Game Boy Color in front of the TV, while I'm reading comics at the very back of the room with the window slightly open to enjoy the cool breeze. Very humid in Malaysia, especially indoors. All of a sudden, I could feel a distinct change in the motion of the breeze. It no longer felt the same cool inward flow, but rather like a cold hand gently brushing up and down my neck to the top of my head. My entire body instantly reacted with goosebumps, and it's those kind of goosebumps you know something isn't right. I tried to play it cool, not freak out, pretend not to notice anything for another 5 minutes or so. My dad once told me that if you show you fear, it'll notice and it'll continue to bother you. The brushing continued as I endured, and trust me, it was the longest 5 minutes of my life. I slowly stood up, didn't turn my back to look behind, shook off my goosebumps and said, "Andy, bedtime, let's go." He instantly agreed not to, because he noticed, but he was always afraid to be alone downstairs. We went upstairs, brushed our teeth, and then it's lights out. I remember waking up very suddenly from my sleep, feeling wide awake for no reason. I couldn't see very well as it was still dark, so I assume it was around 3 a.m. While trying to go back to sleep, I heard a very faint meowing in the room. I could instantly tell the difference. It wasn't from my cat, but man-made from a female. Confused, I quickly turned to Andy and I find him facing me sound asleep. The meowing gradually grew louder and its tone became much more sinister until it was next to my ear. My mind remained calm. However, my eyes began tearing up and my entire body was shaking in absolute horror. I no longer have control. I was completely paralyzed. Minutes felt like hours until my body had finally calmed down, and the feeling of dread and horror slowly lingered away. I could feel an external calm in the room. However, I couldn't bring myself to go back to sleep after what happened. To feel safe, I sat upright, positioned my back against the corner of the wall while watching Andy sleeping peacefully until daybreak. When first light entered my room, I immediately woke Andy up to get him out of the room with me. Although I received a couple of grouchy punches and kicks, it was worth it. I don't feel safe for him to be there alone. I don't want to worry the whole family while seeking for an answer. I approached my maid and told her no matter what, do not share with anybody about what I'm about to tell you. Feeling excited, she hurried for her promise, and I told her what happened. My maid's expression immediately turned sour and hesitated to explain. However, I begged her. Really needed the closure. Eventually, she caved and appeared regretful for telling me. But the culprit was a Pontianak, a female vampiric ghost in Malay mythology who they prey on men. Pontianak usually rises at a full moon and announces her presence through high-pitched cries. If the cry is soft, it means that the Pontianak is near. If it's loud, then she must be far. I almost fainted after hearing it. To this day, I still get the goosebumps every time I retell this horrific experience. someone hack into your Discord and join a private conversation. This happened to me in late October 2021. I was self-isolating in a hotel room while on Discord with my girlfriend. I video call her via Discord. We weren't in a group chat. Most of the night nothing happened, but when she went to go take a shower, something strange happened. She left the camera and audio on when she left, and I just went on my phone to pass the time until she came back. Around 10 minutes in, I hear a little girl giggling on the camera. I saw the audio was coming from her microphone because the edge is glowing when someone speaks. Figuring this was just her playing a prank, I say, "Babe, come on, I know it's you. This isn't funny." I then proceed to hear the little girl sing a classic horror song trope. "Daisy, Daisy, give me an answer," or whatever the lyrics are. But halfway through that line, it sounds as though an older voice is singing on top of the little girl's voice, making it extra creepy. Naturally, I think she's just using a voice box or YouTube video or something, but I immediately find out that that isn't the case. I start saying, "Babe, this isn't funny, cut it out, I know it's you." But then the little girl's voice replies, "Hello?" I give a nervous laugh in response. It almost seemed like the little girl mocked me by also laughing as I was laughing, and then says, "I see you," followed by, "Look behind you." First, I didn't look behind me, but then I did a quick jerk at a moment later, just to make sure nothing was there. I was freaked out at that point, wondering what the hell's happening. Then I see my girlfriend come back into the room after taking a shower with a towel wrapped around her, still a bit wet from the shower. I didn't tell her what happened because I was going to be home for another 3 weeks. She would be by herself. Ghost on Discord. During the height of COVID in 2021, I had to take a plane somewhere for work. Beforehand, I had to self-isolate in a hotel for 2 weeks. During that 2-week period, I was on Discord video chatting with my wife every day. Nothing really happened, for the most part. One night, however, we were talking and watching stuff together like normal. She went to go and take a shower, but just left the camera on. Is this the same story? As I'm sitting there chilling on my phone, not looking at the camera, I still had my headset on. I heard a little girl's voice come through my headset. I forgot specifically what I had said, but I do remember hearing giggling. So I turned to the computer. I thought, "Oh, she's playing a prank on me. Very funny." But then there's no reply. I then hear a voice sing the classic scary movie trope, "Daisy, Daisy." This is the exact same story. This must be from the same user, but written on different posts. I digress. The little girl's voice becomes 2 voices overlapping each other like a man and a girl at the same time and became distorted. As this is all happening, I see the green glow around the border pop up to show that the audio is coming from my wife's microphone. I thought this was your girlfriend, now it's your wife. I keep trying to say, "Haha, I know, very funny," and the talking stops. I say, "Hello?" trying to get her to reply, but then the little girl's voice replies back, "Hello?" At this point, I'm freaking out. I asked another question, but I forgot what it was. I remember it being a pretty simple question. After that, I remember the little girl saying, "Look behind you," and then laughing. Obviously, at this point, I'm pissing my pants. I did one of those scary movie reactions where you turn around super fast, but nothing was there. Now my wife comes back from the shower, or his previous girlfriend. I see her come out in only the hallway. We have our small apartments. There's no way she was at the computer. No way she used a soundboard, which I don't think she even heard of before. I didn't end up telling her what happened till I got back. Otherwise, she would have been scared out of her mind by herself. To this day, I get the chills thinking about it. I tried searching online to see if people had their own Discords hacked or something that made hackers talk through their mics, but found nothing. If anyone has any input, please tell me. Haven't found any explanation to it all. Ask Reddit. My friend and I were waiting in line at a boba tea place in early 2019. It was crowded, and a guy walked in with a full-sized shopping cart from the grocery store around the block. In the cart were several largest pre-packed party trays, cheese and crackers, CRUDIT', Crudites, Cruditties, things like that. The guy himself seemed totally normal. He was youngish, maybe 30, dressed casually, but well, he sort of gave me the what's up head nod to the cashier. They acknowledged him in a similar way. I assumed that they recognized him. I'd never seen anyone with a cart full of party snacks just out and about. But I thought maybe he was a delivery guy or picking up from the foot of a GoPuff. GoPuff? Alright. I gotta get over these things. He was picking up on foot for GoPuff. After I looked away, he sort of backed up into me a bit, and I went, "Oh, I'm sorry." Stepped out of his way. He looked me in the eye, smiled, and in the most genuinely reassuring voice I've ever heard, he said, "Honey, don't worry about the other people. Think about yourself. You don't need apologizing all the time." My friend turned around and kind of jokingly goes, "Girl, he must know you," referring to my habit of instantly reacting to any situation like this with an apology, and he smiled. He cheerfully said, "I do." He waited in line next to me, close to me, but not really by choice. His cart took up most of the space not occupied by the other customers, and he didn't say anything else. I assumed this odd interaction was over. I got zero weirdo vibes from him, which is weird, since I almost always have some discomfort from any strange man standing that close to me. But even though we were practically touching, he didn't loom, didn't seem to want to invade my space intentionally, but also didn't seem to mind having no personal space for himself. It was like he was just casually and comfortably standing next to an old friend, and I felt uncharacteristically at ease. As my friend reached the counter and began to place her order, the man stepped out and away to my side. I instinctively turned toward him. He then pushed his cart away a little bit, and in one fluid motion got down on his hands, did a push-up, kissed my foot, and jumped up, like he did one single burpee. When he stood back up, he smiled this really friendly smile and said calmly and cheerfully, "Love you." I looked over at the cashier and said the exact same way and stepped back toward his cart. I turned toward the counter very confused. My friend turned around just after and then placed her order and looked behind me and said, "Where'd the cart guy go?" Y'all, he was gone. Him, his cart, everything. Got out of a crowded boba shop in 5 seconds flat. He wasn't visible outside through a wall or windows either. This was impossible. My friend later asked why he was saying, "I love you." That was all she'd experienced of that situation. I told her what had happened while she was placing her order, and she was shocked. She almost didn't believe me, but the couple next to us waiting for their order confirmed my story to her, and to be honest, the many people behind us in line seemed extremely confused. The cashier seemed to be the only mildly reaction to, taking my order unfazed like this, as if it were a normal occurrence. Though, having worked food service, this part was not at all surprising. This tea shop is literally attached to my apartment building. I go there a lot. Never seen this man before or since. What weirds me out the most is that this guy didn't at any point give me any kind of creepy vibe at all. Not very anxious or introverted, and I generally have a pretty good radar for when someone's in my proximity and is about to do something weird. I don't usually have a neutral emotion reaction to interactions of any kind with strangers, strange men being overly familiar with me especially, but this guy didn't register to my intuition as any kind of threat or creep. He kissed my foot in a crowded shop in broad daylight, but he didn't linger on it. There was no indication that it was in any way sexual or even vaguely inappropriate for him. Like there was nothing in it for him. It was just a thing he did, as it was perfectly natural and friendly. It was carried out like a polite handshake in the space of a few seconds. He just walked in, bumped into me, read a major personality flaw from an offhanded apology, waited in line with me for absolutely nothing, delivered absolutely nothing from his cart, kissed my foot like it was some weird boba queen, professed his love to me and the cashier, and vanished without a trace. Well, that's a weird story to end on. See ya.